Hello and welcome to another Developer Essentials. So this time round, we're going to be taking a look at audio. And so I've already lowered the sound effects volume a fair chunk to hopefully not destroy people's eardrums. And I've also grabbed a bunch of sound effects. So what I have used for setting up the sound effects is this tool called BFXR. And you can get similar things like this as well. And what it is it's a tool that is able to generate small sound samples. So this is perfect for if you were doing things like sound effects in particular for sort of an 8-bit style game and you wanted those kind of sound effects. It's really great for doing things like that. So you get various ones where we can have pickup sounds. And every time I click on it, we can see it randomizes the settings here. And I can export those to WAV files, and it's got a bunch of different presets here. And there's a few different programs and tools like this, and I'll put some links to different ones in the descriptions as well. So that you can actually check those out. But really great way for being able to generate a bunch of sound effects, just so we've got some initial ones there that we can be making use of in the project. And there's a few different ways that we can work with audio in Unity as well. So what I'm going to show today is a fairly simple way of working with it. It's something that's more than sufficient for setting up things, in particular for sort of small, simple games. So we'll get that set up. But then there will be later videos that I'll be doing where we start to look at some of the audio mixer stuff in Unity, which allows us to do more sophisticated things with the audio setup. And then also we will, in a later deep dive, take a look at audio engines, so third-party programs that we can use for working with audio in our games. That allow us to take our audio setups to an even further level of quality above, and also provide a really great tool then for if we're working with someone who's a dedicated sound engineer, or that's primarily their role. It really allows them to do some very awesome stuff. So let's get some stuff set up. We're going to start with let's rename our scene. So this is going to be our audio demo scene. So we're going to start off with just something really simple. And what I want to have is I want to just have something in the world that is able to emit a random sound. That's going to be what I want to start off with. So I'm going to create a sphere, and this is going to be a random sound emitter. And I'm going to give it a script. And what this is going to do, this is going to be random sound emitter. I'll make sure I have that in a separate folder as well, just so that's nicely grouped. So what this will do is we will give it a list of sound effects, and then it will pick a random one of those and just play that. So we've got our scripts folder, we'll bring that in. I'm also, just so I can easily spot things in the world, going to do the usual setup of creating a couple of materials. So we're just going to have a material for ground and a material for the sound emitter. So we have our sound emitter, and then we're also going to create a plane for the ground. So we've got that. So one of the key things with how sound works in the game is we actually have a choice of whether positioning matters. And initially, we're going to have positioning won't matter with this. Initially, doesn't matter how it's positioned, we will there won't be any variation. that causes in the sound. So there we go, got our sound emitter. So let's have a look at how we set this up. So we're wanting to randomly play a particular sound. So the first thing we need if we're doing that is, well, we need a list of our sounds. So I'm going to set up my list of, now in this case, they are audio clips. So this is going to be my set of sounds. Now, if I'm wanting it to be random, then I want to also probably have a bit of a delay in between. So what I can do with that is serialize field, float, and I'm going to do the randomness a way that you might not have seen previously, where we have emission buffer time, which I'm going to set to 5 seconds. Then I'm going to have something that, so rather than having a min and max time, I'm going to have an emission buffer variation. So how much it can vary either side of that. So I'm going to say that it can vary, and I'm going to have this be expressed as a percentage. So I'm going to say that it can vary 20% either way. So it's going to be a range 0 to 1. All right, so I need to track my time. So next emission time is equal to 0, because what I can do here is, okay, well, if the next emission time is greater than 0, then let's update it. So update the next emission time if needed. And then what I want to do is then check time to play sound. If it is, so if our next emission time is less than or equal to 0, then the first thing I want to do is I want to pick a clip. So audio clip, selected clip. Now I'm okay with it being able to repeat which one gets selected, so I'm just going to pick directly. I'm not going to then remove the one that I've picked from the list. So random range 0 to sounds.count. So it's going to pick a random sound, and then I'm going to need to be able to play that. So to play it, I need to have an audio source. So serialize field, and in this case, I actually won't make it serialize field. What I'll do is I'll say require component type of audio source. So an audio source is used for emitting a sound. So we have audio sources that emit a sound, and then audio listeners that hear a sound. We can only have one audio listener in a scene, so one set of ears. If we have more than one audio listener, then we will actually get error messages. It's not something that it supports. So we've got our selected clip. We've got our audio source as a required component, which means I can have audio source, linked source, that I can then populate here, which I don't need to error check this, because by having the require component, I'm saying that this script must exist alongside an audio source. So I don't need to error check this, because Unity is actually going to enforce this rule for me. So I've got my audio source, I've got my clip, so then I can say, hey, linked source. And so for something like this, where it's a sound effect, one of the general ones that I would use is I can use a play one shot, and I've got different options there, so I can also give it a specific volume scale, which is handy. But I can give this my selected clip, and then what I need to do is set that next emission time. So on my next emission time, it's going to be equal to, so I need to do a random range from minus emission buffer variation to emission buffer variation, and it auto-completed with the deprecated one. So this is going to be a number that will randomly be from, in this case, minus 0.2 to 0.2. So if I add 1 to that, then what I've got is a number that's now going from 0.8, or 80%, to 1.2, or 120%. Because I can then multiply that by my emission buffer time, so then it's giving me that variation. So that will give me a bit of variation there in the interval, but the sound itself has time. And so I probably want it to be this amount of time after the sound has finished playing. So what I can do is say, okay, well, next emission time, add to that my selected clip. And if we have a look through the information we have on the selected clip, we have length. So this is the time of length of the clip in seconds. So set up the next emission time. So if we run this, then we'll be able to link up the sounds that I've already got added in, which I've put those in the audio folder. So what I'm going to do is, because I want to link up all of them in one go, I don't want to have to drag each one in individually. So if I click on the lock here up at the top right, that locks the inspector in terms of it will not change from the object that's currently selected, which means I can then go and select other things and then drag them in. And then once I'm done, unlock it. And then it will go back based upon what I've selected. So really handy way of being able to make it just, you can link stuff up easily. So if I run this, should get sounds. We could hear the sound playing there, and then in a few seconds we should get another. And what we'll notice is it won't matter where the camera is, it doesn't actually affect the sound. So it won't actually affect what the sound actually sounds like. It will just always sound exactly the same. And that's because the audio source, if we take a look at the setup here, by default, Unity makes the sounds be what's called 2D sounds. The name is a little bit misleading in that a 2D sound, it doesn't actually change with distance. So the intensity of it, the location of it, things like that don't actually change with distance, whereas a 3D sound does. So we have this option called a Spatial Blend. And the settings that Unity provides for this are a lot more nuanced than just, oh yeah, it's 2D or 3D. We can actually control, and we can see down here this blend of things, we can control what proportion of the sound is 2D versus 3D, which is a really cool level of control. That means that, we could at a particular range control and say that, okay, yes, at this range it's fully 3D, we get directional information, but then when it's further away, we just lose that information, which is really cool. So it gives us a lot of control. And we can see how the distance fall off, things like that are happening. And we can change our distances here. So at the moment, it's using a range of over 1 to 500 meters. So it'd need to be pretty impressively loud sound, pretty terrifyingly loud sound for us to hear it at that. So let's reduce that so we can get a bit more of a sense of that happening over a fairly small range. And so we can more easily see the shape of the graph here. So that's a bit better. Okay, so we can see with this that we have volume is going to change already, and this is default settings. For a 3D sound, the volume will decrease with the distance, and by around 10 meters, it's going to be significantly weaker. So let's test this, and I'm going to bring the spatial blend up to 1. I'm also going to reduce the interval that it's playing sounds at so that we hear a lot more sounds really frequently, just so we can see the effect of distance with this. Because at the moment, our sphere is at the origin, but our camera is actually 10 meters away. So we'll see how it sounds as we move this nearer and farther away. So we're running. We're getting sounds there. We move really close. Much louder. Move farther away. Then it's going to be really, really quiet because we're now at about 20 meters away, which it's going to be super, super quiet. The location will also matter. That will actually feed in because it's 3D now. Where something is located in the world is going to influence the sound from it. That means we can have things come from different sides. We can also adjust settings. We've got controls here for things like that stereo panning. So we could, if we had a sound and we wanted to artificially, so not move it in the world, but just in our algorithms, just sweep it from one side to the other, we can do that with the stereo panning. So that's if we've got our spatial blend at full. And if we lower the spatial blend, so it's at 0.5, 0.5, then sounds are going to tend to be louder. We'll still get fall off that will happen, but it's going to be significantly less because we're retaining a lot more of that sound. If we've got the spatial blend at full, we can also adjust this curve because these points here can be moved. Got a fairly sophisticated setup to allow us to move these around. So if we wanted, we could have something quite ridiculous like this, where it gets quieter, but then if we hit the sweet spot of being about 25 meters away, it actually gets louder. Now, thankfully, those do reset when we stop. So, okay, spatial blend. Interestingly, spatial blend did not reset. Let's just double check that that's the case. Might have just been that no. Okay, I did have it changed. So, okay, we can control things like of our volume. We can, in here, in terms of like add with distance, we can control that. We can also increase this. We can make it that we control how much of a sound is going through these changes with distance, and we can customize those. And we can, with this, we're able to control quite a few sort of things, because we saw when we were playing, one of the options on play was to adjust the volume. So we could have that of, okay, float min sound volume, and that might be 80%, say. We might also then have a max sound volume 0.9, because that would then let us just randomize this. So it means every time the volume is going to be a little bit different, which is cool. Like that helps get a little bit more variation into there. The other thing that we can do is we can also vary the pitch slightly every time. So min sound pitch, and we can see what the current setting for the pitch is. The current setting is 1, and if we make it that the pitch can, say, drop to 0.8 and can maybe go up to 1.2. So a 20% variation either side. How we work with that is we would say, well, linked source, pitch, random range, min sound pitch to max sound pitch. Now what I'm going to do is just for this, I'm going to pick always the first sound so we can hear the actual changes happening there with this. Because each time it's going to be a slightly different pitch and a slightly different volume. Now, it's not going to be enough to make it sound like an entirely different sound, but it can break up the repetitiveness. You can hear those slight pitch changes, and we can see our pitch changing a little bit each time. So it's a way of making so that you don't need as many different sounds. That you can get by with, for example, like with footsteps, you can have a couple of sounds for that, but then randomize the pitch slightly, randomize the volume slightly, and then it just breaks it up. It means that it's not the exact same repeated sound every time, because we will pick up on that. We will notice when it is exact same sound, and then that gets really annoying and intrusive. It stands out really obviously. So we want to try and have a little bit of variation there with this. So we're randomizing the pitch slightly, and then what we're doing is play with a randomized volume. So this setup works really well for doing sort of sound effects for things. We have a bunch of sources, and in this case I'm playing at a specific interval, but we could be playing these sounds based on a collision happening, for example. We could be playing them based upon an action or a key input from the user. So we've got a lot of different options there of what we can do with that in terms of being able to play the sounds there to sort of make the game work nicely. Okay, so we've seen what we can do for sound effects, but what if we wanted to have some actual background audio, so some music tracks, things like of that? Then we need to look at options there for that. So what I'm going to do is and I'll put this link in the description below as well. So we have some really great sources of free music, and in particular royalty-free music. So one of the really great sources is this place called Incompetech, and with this, there's a lot of different free ones that we have available. And this person, Kevin MacLeod, there is just so much music that they have done, and a huge range of genres. And one of the really cool things with these is in terms of the licensing that they often make these available with. So if we go and take a look at the license setup, so one of the key things if you're using these is you must provide attribution. And I really want to underscore that. If you're using resources, please make sure you provide attribution. What I generally will do with this is for in particular games in the credits screen, I will actually place in all of the text. So each thing needs to be attributed. The really great thing is that this allows you to use this for things that are commercial as well. It's really, really great. So it can be used for commercial, non-commercial across various products, including in particular for video games. So it's really, really great. You can't sell or redistribute unaltered copies, so make sure that you're not doing anything like of that. Again, don't be republishing it, claiming copyright free, things like that. You're not claiming ownership of it. This license is great. This resource is fantastic. It's an excellent setup, and we've got so many different styles and types of music available. And I can listen to a particular one, which have got really good setup for being able to just play and listen to the different things. Which is very cool. I would need to check my headphones to make sure it is actually properly playing, which it is. So really great setup. When I go to download, so it shows you the different options. It gives you the indication of what these different things allow. So they do, with the extended one, it gives you higher quality. It allows you to use it without attribution. So these are things to be aware of when you're looking at the license. So if I go for the free license, it reminds us of the specific conditions. You have to accept that. And it runs through the full set there, and it gives you the particular text. So what I would be doing with this, and what I'll do for this project, is I'm going to actually add in just a little bit of UI, which I'm going to use Text Mesh Pro, just so I get really nice looking UI, because I'm going to provide attribution. I'm going to make sure that attribution looks damn good. So I'm going to place this down at the bottom. 550 is good, centered, and that looks fine. So I would just be pasting in the text. Make sure we've got the full text in there. So I would probably do my usual configuration of the canvas of scale with screen size. And I need to update my text, make this a little bit higher. So what I would be saying is that should be 50. There we go. So always make sure you're including the attribution in there. So if you're using licensed music, provide that attribution. It's really important. So we can then add this sound file into our project, so we can confirm that I'm definitely not a robot, and download that, and then I'll be able to add that into the project. So Compotech, really, really great, highly recommend. Make sure you are checking the license conditions for the media. Make sure that things that are requiring attribution, that you are providing that attribution. Really important to make sure that you're doing that. So I'll bring that sound file in to the project, and then we will be able to go from there. Okay, so I've got my downloaded file here, so I can just drag this in. And then once I've got that in there, so I can see it's imported it properly, which is good. This, I would probably start grouping these files as well. So some terminology that you'll likely see: SFX for sound effects, and then for background music or ambient music, you might see the term BGM, background music. So that's cool. So I want to have this just play in the background. So what I could do is set up an object that is just going to be background music, and then give this a audio source. And then I can link this clip up, and it already defaults to play on awake. So it will just start playing in the background as soon as I play the game. So we'll have that ticking away, and I can check that I'm able to hear it, which I am. It's a little bit quiet, so I can't always hear it. But then I could adjust things like the volume and everything for it. And if I wanted to have, say, multiple soundtracks that it was switching between, then I could use a very similar setup to what I had here, where it picks a random one and is able to then switch between them. So let's actually do that. Let's set this up. So I'm not going to grab any more audio, but what I will do is set up a little bit of a script that is our music manager. So I'm going to set it up so it can have multiple ones, but it just currently has only one, is what I'm going to set it up for. So mean if you wanted to then use this in other projects, you'd be able to do that. So similar to previously, I need a list of audio clips, and these are going to be my tracks. I also then want to, again, require component. So it has to have that audio source. I can have my audio source linked source, which I can retrieve here. Linked source, get component, audio source. And then what I would be doing is next track start time is 0. So similar to with the previous one, well, okay, if my next track start time is greater than 0, then we'll update it. So we reduce that. Then I check, okay, is my next track start time now less than or equal to 0? Well, if it is, then my linked source, I'm going to, because we saw I can link up the clip there and it will just start playing that. So I'm going to actually change this so that rather than it already having that clip linked up, what I will do is I have to actually manually link up the particular clip. So the clip, and I want to say, so I wanted to, I could have it go randomly or I could have it go in sequence. I'm going to actually demonstrate how we would make it go in sequence. So next track index, going to say is -1. So what we would do is next track index is equal to next track index +1 modulus tracks.count. Because by using modulus, what will happen is when this gets to, this results in being tracks.count, modulus will turn that into 0 because modulus gives us back the remainder. And so use modulus to have the track index wrap back to the start automatically. So that's cool. So our linked source clip is then going to be tracks next track index. Our next track start time, well, we already know what we can say is that is going to be, because we've updated the clip, we're going to go link source clip length. So select the track, select the clip, and set the next track's start time. And then all we need to do is say, okay, well, link source, play. So just tell it to play the current one that's attached. We also have ones for stopping it if we need to, but this will just tell it to start playing that track. So this would allow us to have multiple different audio tracks if we wanted, and just have it move between them in sequence. Because what we set up on the background music is we just drag in our track, and then it will pick that and just start playing it. And we'll see the audio clip here will change. And if we take a listen, we can hear the sounds playing. So really easy way of having the sort of music kick in like of that. But let's take this a little bit further. Because what if we wanted to have the audio fade in and fade out a little bit toward at the beginning and end of a track if we wanted to do that kind of setup? So, okay, serialize field float fade in time. So I'm going to default that to nothing. And then let's have a fade out time. So there are different ways that we could do this. Now, the way that I would normally do something like of this, if I was setting this up fully in code, so I would use something called a coroutine. Now, we haven't dived into coroutines yet, so I'm going to show you a method that doesn't use coroutines and is just largely using stuff that we've already seen. So, okay, we know we've got our fade in, fade out times. And so what I could be doing is something where, okay, let's have fade time remaining is equal to 0. And let's have a fade direction. And I'm also going to default that to 0. So, okay, we're kicking off another track. So what we would do at this time is we would say, okay, fade time remaining is equal to fade in time. We would set the link source volume to be 0. And we would set the fade direction to be 1. Because what we're saying is, okay, over this time period, the volume is going to be increasing. It's going up. So what we're doing here is set up the fade in. Then what I could do is check, okay, well, the fade time remaining is greater than 0. So I know that there's a fade happening. Then I can say, well, my linked source volume, firstly, what I would do is fade time remaining minus equals time.delta time, so I'm updating that. So let's say my link source's volume, it's going to be my current volume plus, now I know what my fade time remaining is. So fade time remaining, what I could do for that is if I said, okay, well, fade time remaining, and I need to know what it originally was. So one approach here would be having something like fade progress. So I'm going to reconfigure this a little bit. So I'm going to have fade time and fade progress. That one down. So I'm going to say fade time and fade progress is 0. So as long as the fade, let's say, is the fade progress, it gets added like this. So what I'm going to use to cue off that there is a fade happening is that the fade time is greater than 0. Is a fade in progress. If so, we update the progress. That means we've got our progress value that'll go from 0 to 1. So then our link source's volume, what happens with that is we don't then add to the volume. What we would do is we would be able to say, well, mathf lerp. And actually, we don't even need to use a mathf lerp because we know our volume goes from 0 to 1. So we could be saying that this is actually equal to our fade progress. But that wouldn't handle if we are decreasing because we want this fade direction to come into play. So what we could do is we could say that our volume, and I might actually change this to is fade in and make that the default. I think this will be a cleaner setup for it. It's using less floats for it. So we'd say F is fade in, then the volume is just fade progress. Otherwise, the volume is 1 minus fade progress. So this will mean that as it fades in and the progress goes up, volume goes up. If it's not fading out, then it's going to go down. So that's going to update our volume. Update volume, and then we just check, okay, well, if fade progress is greater than or equal to 1, then fade time goes back to 0 because we're done doing the fade. So fade completed. So this means we'll be able to have our audio fade in. And well, what about doing the fade out? So the fade out is a little bit of a more interesting one because what we need to check with that is if we're looking for a scenario of if the next track's start time is less than or equal to the fade out time. Then in that case, fade time is equal to fade out. Fade progress, we make sure it's 0. The is fade in, we also then set that to false. Actually, we can get rid of manually changing the volume. Now, the key thing here is next track start time is continuing to decrease. So if we just left it with this, it would constantly restart the fade, which is not what we're wanting to have happen. We only want to restart the fade if there's not currently a fade happening. So we would say if the next track start time is less than that, and fade time is equal to 0. So we're saying within fade out time of the end and not currently fading volume. Just so we don't restart it multiple times. It's an easy thing to have happen. Very, very, very easy to have that happen. But what we can do now, so I'm going to collapse the sound settings there. So I'm going to make it a fairly lengthy fade in time of 5 and similar for fade out. And then if we play this, we're wanting to watch the volume, and we see the volume ramps up over the space of a few seconds. So we've got that fading in happening. Now the track is 2 minutes long. So if we waited for 2 minutes, we would then get it kicking off the fade out. What we can also do is we can actually jump the time typically. So link source, if we take a look at the different options that we've got, we can actually usually set the time. So we can see we've got link source time, so the playback position in seconds. So in this case, what I would actually do is say, okay, well, the link source time, we are going to start this at 30 seconds from the end. So we're going to make it that minus 30, which means the next track would start in 30 seconds. Now we will return these back. This is purely so we can, in a fairly timely manner, see the fading in and also making sure that the fading out is happening. And this is the thing to remember when you're doing stuff with code like that. It's okay to put in temporary little sort of hacks like that to test that your code is behaving. So it's completed doing the fade in at this stage. We also don't have any 3D settings set for this, which is fine. Background music, we often wouldn't have 3D settings configured for it. Background music is generally going to be 2D. The exception there is if it's what we refer to as a diegetic sound, so it's coming from an in-world source. So we can see it's fading out, and then because it hit the next track, it starts fading back in. So I'm going to restore this back to what it was, but we can see how we can actually directly change the start time for an audio effect that's playing. So these are the key sort of essential bits with audio. And as I said, this is using the simplest cut down version of the audio setup in Unity, where we are just only using sources and listeners. There is more sophisticated stuff that we can do where we can be setting up what's called audio mixers, and we can also be setting up stuff using third-party audio engines. But the key stuff, the key sort of takeaways. Audio listeners are the ears, essentially, of your character in the world. You can only have one audio listener in a scene. That's active. If you have multiple active audio listeners, it will get grumpy at you. So we can only have one. We use audio sources for generating sounds, for emitting sounds in the world. Our audio sources have a lot of different settings to control that behavior. In terms of things like our volume and pitch, we can force stereo panning. We can also control how 2D or 3D the sound is. The implication there being a 3D sound, distance and position matters, whereas a 2D sound doesn't. but we can choose something to be a blend in between. We can also have that spatial blend change over time or change over distance if we wanted to. So really effective with those settings, and we saw that we can configure them down here. And as we update things like the spatial blend, we can see where the parameters are, and we can add in new entries. I said we can change the spatial blend with distance just by clicking, dragging, adjusting these curves. And I'm going to reset that back because that would be a really terrible set of spatial blending, but it's a thing that we can do. So really, really handy having that set up for it. And because I've gone and made it controlled by the curve, that's then going to be grumpy at me. I think I need to, there we go, now that I've got rid of all the keys. So if you do accidentally add in the keys, you need to remove all of them afterwards if you're wanting to return it back to being controlled by it. In terms of them working with the sounds, so audio clip is what we use to refer to our sound assets in our project. And we can pick random ones. We can then play them at a random pitch and random volume using play one shot. Randomizing the pitch is a really effective way of making just the same sound a little bit different every time. We can get the duration of a sound as well. So a clips.length is how long that sound is in seconds. If we want to have longer form tracks, so want to have sort of ambient music, background stuff like that, we can do that as well. The difference is rather than using play one shot, we generally would use play, and we have a dedicated audio source for it. We can get the length of those clips, and we can do a very simple way of doing fade in and fade out for having the sound change there in between moving between tracks. As I said, there are ways that we can do this using things called coroutines that we haven't yet had a look at, but those are another way of doing this sort of fade-in logic as well. But this will provide that fade-in behavior there. In terms of sourcing audio, we saw the program BFXR and similar ones for generating sound effects. And also for longer form music, typically, we have Incompetech with Kevin MacLeod, the primary creator of a lot of the content there. And really important thing when we are using these audio files is the requirements for attribution. Really important. If the licenses are requiring attribution, please make sure that you do that. Make sure that it's clearly indicated in your projects. It's very important to be working with those. But the big thing then, following on from that, is dive in and experiment with this. Combine this with other things that we've done. So you could combine this with collisions. So it's playing sounds when a collision happens, that it's playing sounds when something is launched into the world. Different things like that. So experiment with it. See the kinds of things that you can create. And adding in the audio can really just make your game start to feel like it's a real tangible thing, and it can start to really set the tone and mood for it quite effectively. So dive in and experiment and see what kind of things you can make with it. Thanks, folks. If you're looking for the code for the project, then in the description below, you'll find a link to the GitHub. And on the GitHub, I've got the code for this project and for all of the other projects. They're freely available. And if you have found the video helpful and you'd like to support the channel, then throwing in a like or subscribing is always a huge help. If you're looking for further ways to support, then I do have a Patreon set up, and that's going to help me keep managing to do these videos for a long time to come, which is going to help more people make cool things. And that's awesome, because that's what this is all about, is helping more people make more cool things. And that is all. Thank you.